It is time for the Media Beat with David Tereshchuk. David joins us every Friday here on Robin Hood Radio. He's also a PBS television correspondent reporting on ethics and belief. He's got a great website himself called themediabeat.us, and we say good morning to him right now. Good morning, David.
Well, hello. It's David Tereshchuk reporting in from the Media Beat in the media capital of the world, as every Friday.
You know, as I was just saying, the antics that are coming out of Washington, you couldn't, if you had a West Wing that was written like this years ago, people would have said, well, he's a great screenwriter and a scriptwriter, but something like this can't happen with the president, the Republican-controlled Senate and the Democratic-controlled House, all putting plans and all sitting there doing nothing. It's unbelievable to look at, David. Yeah,
truth is stranger than fiction and evidently more horrible and outrageous than fiction. We're in a, particularly in the matter that you were referring to, the various plans, such as they are, for relief from COVID, stuck in a kind of triangular fight between the two arms of Congress and of course the White House. Steve Mnuchin as Treasury Secretary purporting to have a plan, but a plan that doesn't go anywhere really to meet the need. And I was reading an opinion piece that sort of shifted the viewpoint really on this whole question. It was I think it was Paul Krugman, the economist, who's not only a Nobel Prize-winning economist but also an NY Times regular columnist as well, virtually a staff member. But he was trying to shift our way of thinking about it, essentially saying that a lot of the labeling that we in the media are going for is somewhat wrong-headed. All too many of us are talking about the need for a stimulus of some kind to come out, a stimulus program like we've had before in times of great economic trial, like this is, of course, as well as a public health trial. To think of it, however, he says, as a stimulus package that's needed is just the wrong way of thinking. It's much better if it's conceived as. Let me explain it this way. If stimulus is what you think is needed, you're probably seeing the picture wrongly. Stimulus is a mechanism by which people who have money in their pocket are being encouraged to spend it and therefore generate more economic activity. That's not what we have here, of course. What we've got here is a need not so much for stimulus, says the columnist, but disaster relief. It's as simple as that. We are in a disaster and we need relief. And as you were saying, just before we came on the air, before I joined you on air at least, that to have packages which don't take account of the needs of the 50 states that make up the United States of America is a massive oversight. It's not a matter of priming the pump economically. It's a matter of getting help to where help is needed. And a state that no longer has the revenue with which to carry out essential duties, especially now when there is a remedy at hand of a kind, a vaccine, a preventive remedy, but it has to be organized, it has to be distributed, it has to be delivered in the sense of medical delivery into someone's arm. All of this is a weighty responsibility, largely for the states and their public health arms, and that's what's needed. and of course it's what we're not getting. It's the grinding down towards the end of the year, the end of the congressional year, and the end of the presidential term is a time when you want to get things tidied up. And in fact, we've got a horrible logjam, which is horrific, especially if you contrast it with the sort of vile kind of rush that the federal government has managed to achieve with a sudden what's been called a sudden rush of bloodlust to the head, almost, with federal executions taking place in a flurry towards the end of the Trump administration, in contrast with the 17-year effective moratorium that there's been for these last 17 years. The contrast is very telling. Our institutions, our governmental institutions, are failing us, and seriously, as this year dwindles down to its end.
And we really shouldn't have to sit here as people waiting for the Supreme Court to make a decision on a case where Texas, where their Attorney General is potentially under indictment and is obviously doing something, to probably try to get a pardon from President Trump. But you shouldn't have Texas lead an assault against four of the four swing states, claiming that the way they elect presidents was wrong. And then you have over 19 attorney generals of Republican-controlled states that go along with them. And then you also have... And
106 members, Republican members, of course, of Congress joining in the support for that extraordinary case headed by Texas. I mean, when a court of law asks you what is your standing, to be, that's that technical term, your standing in pursuing a course, that's the question we need to ask here. What business is it of Texas? What four other states do? Well, I think you put your finger on it when you say that the Texas official who is spearheading it is in dire need of a presidential pardon himself.
It's, when you look at this, the way our Constitution is set up and the way this democracy is set up is that each state controls its own elections. That's what makes this Constitution so amazing, and what makes this democracy so amazing is that the states control and operate their own elections, and it's one of the basic tenets of our democracy, of our nation. And I have to think that even though there's a 6-3 conservative majority on the Supreme Court, these justices have to be sitting up there wondering, really, what the hell is going on? Because this is a direct. This isn't like Bush versus Gore, okay? That was 500 and some odd votes. That was going on and on and on, and finally, Al Gore thought, for the best of the country, you know what? Was just, I'm not gonna fight it anymore, and the Supreme Court made their decision. But this is totally different. This is trying to invalidate the votes of millions and millions and millions of people who legally voted.
Yeah, there's been some very interesting journalism about this, not necessarily from what you'd think of as conventional journalists this week. And I want to give a shout out, and the way we do that with our bugle fanfare, for a take on all of this issue of the checks and balances that we're supposed to have in this country. Let's have the fanfare, if you could.
All right, let me bring that right up here right now, as long as I can see that my come on, where is it? Hang on, here we go. I got it now, I do believe.
We dragged the bugler out and we got him to play the fanfare. That's good. The fanfare goes to not a full-time journalist, but a professor of law. In fact, an interesting kind of professor of law. He's Tim Wu, and he's professor of law, science, and technology at Columbia University. And his particular area is kind of wonky and nerdy a lot of the time. He's science and technology is very much his brief, although he's a lawyer by trade and a teaching lawyer at that. He's the one who, if you remember, invented the phrase net neutrality as a way to counter the increasing tendency of internet providers to favor the kind of customers that they prefer, corporate and high-paying customers. And of course, it's no surprise that net neutrality has taken a big wallop during the Trump years. But he's been addressing this whole question of he's essentially taking a step back and looking more broadly at the overall assault, really, on our republic, on our democracy that's happened in the last 4 years. It's a great analytical piece he's written in the New York Times, where he's an occasional contributor as an op-ed writer. And he's analyzed the situation in a way that treats Trump's 4 years as history. Interestingly, that's a word that Trump himself uses as one of his favorite insults. Along with "you're fired," he can say "your history," as if history is some kind of terrible thing. I guess it is in this case. But Wu takes on a very broad overall look and says that Trump didn't succeed in destroying our democracy in these 4 years, certainly, and probably won't in the last 40-something days that are left before it. He is replaced by Biden. But it's not because of our traditional sets of checks and balances. He's particularly analytical about this, and that's what makes his argument so strong. Trump, he says, didn't destroy democracy, not because of these much proclaimed checks and balances of ours and the separation of powers, but mainly he's isolating the fact that the whole principle that we've always also been very proud of, that we are a nation of laws, not of men, was working in the favor of, to the advantage of our surviving democracy. And essentially, it's a triad, he says, of law professionals, people working in the judicial system, federal prosecutors in particular, but also allied with them, properly minded, straightforwardly thinking military officers and election officials, of course. This is the triad that has managed to help our republic survive the years of Trump. He points out quite rightly, of course, as you were saying, that the Senate and the House don't deserve much credit here. It's mainly ordinary Americans doing their own diligent work, especially within the judicial system. And it's not to say, of course, that there hasn't been, cards stacked against our republic through the judicial system itself. Indeed, the Department of Justice has not performed itself from the top, at least, with Bill Barr in charge, as anything like the independent force it's meant to be. But the rank and file federal prosecutors, in particular, have had a high sense of duty, and and it's, I guess, when you bring up the Texas case, we're here in a situation where we can say, yeah, this is a crazy case, but it's more than likely. Its chances of success are kind of infinitesimal. One of the cases, one of the arguments it's trying to push, of course, is that the Biden victory was just an impossibility and should never have happened. One of the extraordinary arguments in this case is that it had a chance of 1 in a quadrillion. That's the so-called legal argument. But all in all, as we see all the efforts to overturn the election result that Trump and his allies are pursuing now, you can look back over the last 35, 36 days, and you can count 50 defeats in court for Trump and his allies, as charted by those whose job it is to chart every single one of these very often ridiculous efforts. So we have something to be proud of, and that's the people who actually operate day to day our judicial system, and of course people who operate day to day every 4 years our electoral system, and despite all the optics that were turned by Trump and his role as commander-in-chief, you've also got a solid set of military men and women who have refused to have the military turn to Trump's will, as he so clearly has wanted over these last 4 years.
When you look back at the last month, and you look at the position the Supreme Court has been put in, one thing that's so obvious, if you remember in Gore versus Bush, every, and I mean just about every law firm with experience in constitutional election law scrambled to be either with the Democrats or the Republicans. I mean, there was a pool of talented lawyers on both sides that would knock your socks off.
Oh, yeah, and the rush to Florida was quite palpable. That great sucking noise you could hear was everyone running southeast. Yes, indeed.
And compare that to now. Look at the legal team that the administration had to put together. There's not one constitutional or election expert on there. No firms have come in. And this is amazing because lawyers will basically argue anything for money, but there's not one terrific, strong constitutional election law firm that has come in and wanted to get in on this case.
Yeah, bearing out my point entirely.
Yeah.
That people just doing their jobs, their regular jobs, and with a sense of what those jobs are really about, not about power, but about having our society function well. They're the ones who are our best. It turns out that they are our best safeguard against autocracy.
It'll be interesting to see if the Supreme Court will rule on this today, or if they're going to wait until Monday, when all the selection of the delegates are going to be done, of course, in the Electoral College on Monday.
Certified and recertified, if in a sense, yes. But by Monday, there will be no more wiggle room. And in fact, wiggle room has altogether been diminishing day by day, and it would enable the Supreme Court to swipe this irritant away. The buzzing of the Texas case is going to be very short-lived, I imagine.
All right, let's turn to the incredibly sad story. And the way our doctors, our first responders are responding to COVID-19 has improved. The percent of deaths is down from when it first started, but the number of deaths now truly is at a catastrophic rate. Over 3,000 Americans are dying now every day from COVID-19.
And the overall total rapidly approaching 900,000. Yes, it's the death toll is just an appalling indictment of an industrial industrialized, financially enormous, and for a long time, undoubted leader of the world in all things modern and progressive, in the sense of progressing society forwards in terms of prosperity and success. And yet here we are, greatest nation in the world. We were often tempted to say, leading the world in the worst possible way, the worst off country when it comes to this calamity that has struck the world as a whole, but America worst of all. It's a terrible indictment of who's been in charge throughout 2020, the year of our modern day year of the plague. 2020 will go down in history as one of the most mismanaged cases of public health pandemonium that the world has ever seen.
And the national effects come down locally. We interviewed Dr. Mark Herko, who heads Sharon Hospital. And in the beginning of the pandemic, the National Guard set up a reserve hospital tent in case of an overflow. And we were speaking with Mark Herko, and I said, is there any chance that that'll come back? And he said, I don't see how, because unlike the first time, because this now is in effect in all 50 states, there is no extra help to come and do this. Hospitals are now on their own. There's not enough nurses. It's an entirely different situation now, where we have the experience and the techniques to lower the death rate, but we're running out of emergency room space, and we have first responders in the medical society, in the ambulances, we're running out of people. Sure.
And those individual people are running out of their own resources, too. The last hospital I was looking at had an extraordinary depletion rate. People are exhausted, and why wouldn't they be? All because things have not been organized well, with view to an overview, and one hopes that a new administration in Washington can try and get its hands around it, but and develop an overview and an overarching plan for dealing with it. But of course, our resources are already stretched to breaking point, and it's hard to be at all optimistic about it.
And one final thing before we go, I have so many friends of mine that are Trump supporters, and I respect their opinions. I don't always agree with their opinions. I'm not going to call them names or anything like that. I will never do that. But what I don't understand is what people have to understand in this country. What did you think was going to happen when social media busted wide open, and now people can choose their own stream of facts, whether they're true or not, and how hard is it to tell whether something's true or not when you have so much stuff being thrown up against the wall, and Americans willing, every American, whether you're a Democrat, Republican, it seems, whether you're a liberal, conservative, whether you're progressive, whatever, seems to take all this information in, and then they decide for themselves what are facts. And I don't know how we break this. I don't know how we break out of this, David. I have no idea.
Yeah, the confusion, of course, public confusion is the autocrat's best friend. And we certainly have had an information landscape which has been amenable to that taking place. I don't think anybody could have foreseen the way that the great democratizing, of course, of information, which the Internet offered us to begin with, could get so perverted. A few far-sighted people did see it and did express concerns about it. But if you have an information world gone crazy, which is what has happened in this country and other countries around the world too, then you've got the capacity for utter confusion. And if in that situation you then have the kind of force unleashed which pays no attention to human frailty whatever, then you have a pandemic rushing ahead, and even the common sense measures that are available to us to halt it and contain it become politicized, then you're in a disaster situation, which of course we are in now. And, and as I said right at the beginning of our talk this morning, it's a case for disaster relief, not any kind of stimulus or any kind of reactivation of our systems. What we're in need of now is well organized disaster relief.
And if you don't get that disaster relief, there's no need for a stimulus package afterward because it's too late. The disaster relief is that bridge that would get you to a business stimulus package.
Perfectly. And meanwhile, of course, the misinformation machine carries on working like crazy because it is crazy. Yeah. There's no rationale to it, except the rationale of people wanting to hold on to power, who have outlived their right to exert that power. And here you have the other side of the coin, if you like, of that optimistic analysis I was quoting earlier about the survival of our republic being ensured by ordinary people doing their jobs well. We get, on the other hand, the way that the impact of the top leadership and its appalling malfeasance and bluntly speaking, its preferences for distortions of the truth to any kind of real action, we end up with the rhetoric coming out of the White House taken up by Trump allies across the nation. The impact that this is having on the murky undergrowth of our society, and we have Trump supporters gathering around. One instance I saw only this week was the Trump supporters, who many of them armed, gathering outside the Michigan Secretary of State's house and making the kind of threats that they made there, and the chair of Wisconsin's election commission having photos of her house posted on Twitter by Trump supporters. That ugly kind of threatening behavior was profiled very clearly, again by the New York Times, in this case a very effective piece of investigative journalism, but also the kind of headlines that you're seeing elsewhere, like the Washington Post specifically addressing a Washington Post editorial to what it calls the danger of violence from all of this desperate last gasp flailing by the Trump administration and its supporters. It's a very ugly picture we have in front of us.
And as a last note, the 70 million people that voted for Donald Trump has been now observed by two really outlandish three, Sinclair, Newsmax, and One America News. They realize that there is a big contingent of people. As long as you keep putting out pro-Trump media, you're going to get eyes and you're going to get viewers. And now, Fox News, for the first time at one point last week, was replaced in the ratings by Newsmax, and that's the dangerous part now. It's now money's involved in it, and companies, information companies, are showing up to collect that money simply by going after those 70 million voters.
A dive for the deep, yes. And we can look to see our journalistic standards being squandered and thrown out the window while that headlong downward plunge takes place.
Well, on that great note, David, we'll speak to you next week.
Maybe we'll have better things to talk about.
All right, take care,
Let's hope
David.
so.
All right, bye-bye. David Tereshchuk, the Media Beat here on Robin Hood Radio. You can find him on demand. The Media Beat on demand, robinhoodradio.com on demand. Just click on the Media Beat, and they're all up there for you to view and listen to.